Today we're going to continue our study on love. Love is something everyone wants to have. We want to be valued and cherished. We want to feel that special feeling down in the pit of our stomachs. And the Apostle John, you can read the books of John, and he wrote about it very often. It was important to him, and he put it forward as the most important command of Christ's teachings. John wrote that everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. And the one who does not love does not know God. So if there ever were a teaching that we would want to master, this one needs to be at the top. Paul wrote about love as well in 1 Corinthians 13. We're going to go there in just a moment. Paul teaches us about what love is all about. The world constantly warps our perception of love, I believe. It tells us that love is about flesh, or getting what we want, or feelings that we feel when we're close to someone special. And the Bible doesn't deny that people have closeness and need those special feelings, and that we have relationships that we need to have respect and we need to be cherished and accepted. There's something that goes wrong when we don't have some of those relationships in our lives. But it tells us that the way to getting those things needs to begin with an understanding of God's love and then how to give it to other people. You discover more about love by loving other people than you do by trying to go around demanding that people love you. And so we've been discussing the positive aspects of love the past couple of weeks here. Kindness, love is kind. And patience, love is patient. The things that we should strive to do. But just like when you're teaching somebody to throw a baseball, you can teach them how to throw it properly, and then sometimes you have to go back and say, not like this, and you have to correct things. And so Paul says, love is like these things. But then he turns around and tells us what love is not like, what it doesn't do. Sometimes the best way to understand it is to look at what it isn't. And so he says, love is patient, love is kind, love is not jealous, it does not brag, and it is not arrogant. 1 Corinthians 13:4. This is the third week I've been on verse 4, and I promise next week I'm going to get to verse 5. But this week we're going to focus on verse 4. People generally associate jealousy with love. People in love are the ones we expect to be jealous. You immediately maybe think about a man and a woman who are in love, but it's probably not the kind of jealousy that Paul has in mind here. I had a great illustration all set up with, a woman in the Navy and her jealous husband. And truth is, though, while we use this passage a lot in weddings and things like that, what he has in mind here is less about a man and a woman, and really it's about something else. You read the Bible, you find some interesting and seemingly contradictory statements made about God. God himself says, I am a jealous God. Of course, that's in Hebrew. This is a Greek word here. But what he means by that statement is he doesn't want to be shared with other gods. He means that he's passionate about his people. He's possessive of them. He wants to protect his relationship with us. He wants us to value him. And when we go and share that with some other made-up god or replacement, there's something destroyed or messed up in the relationship, just like with a human relationship. But the word that Paul uses here in 1 Corinthians is the word zelos, which is the word we normally associate in English or translate to English as zeal or zealous. I don't know if you ever thought about it, but I never really thought about those words being similar, but their roots are identical in Greek. You can have zeal, you can translate it zeal in one place and translate it jealous in another. It can be a good or a bad word. You really think about the kind of zeal that Paul encouraged in 2 Corinthians chapter 7. I'm going to turn there and read verses 7 and 10. 10 and 11. 2 2 Corinthians. Paul would talk about zeal a lot. It's a positive thing in many ways. We want people to go out and have enthusiasm for God and doing the right things. And he says here in verse 10, "For the sorrow that is according to the will of God produces a repentance without regret, leading to salvation. But the sorrow of the world produces death. For behold, what earnestness this very thing, this godly sorrow, has produced in you. What vindication of yourselves, what indignation, what fear, what longing, what zeal, what avenging of wrong. In everything you have demonstrated yourselves to be innocent in the matter." And so Paul talks about zelos there, zeal, in a very positive way, that the Corinthians responded to some kind of correction that he made to them, and they wanted to do the right thing with a lot of passion and enthusiasm. They followed through, responded to the teaching, did the right things. And Paul recognizes those things, and he says, that's the way Christ is changing you and working in your heart. It's a great thing. Same word. But zeal isn't always a good thing. When you look over at Galatians in chapter 1, turn over a couple of books here. Just one, really. Paul writes there, "For I would have you know," Galatians 1:11, "I would have you know, brethren, that the gospel which was preached by me is not according to man. For I neither received it from man, nor was I taught it, but I received it through a revelation of Jesus Christ. For you have heard of my former manner of life in Judaism, how I used to persecute the church of God beyond measure and trying to destroy it, and I was advancing in Judaism beyond many of my contemporaries among my countrymen, being more extremely zealous for my ancestral traditions." Same word used there. Zeal. Paul describes his previous zeal for God and the traditions of the law that had led him to persecute the church of God. And Paul's zeal, he says, he observes, was misplaced or misdirected. It created a spirit of hate and opposition. He was going around seeking out Christians to destroy them. He was opposing the people of God zealously, with enthusiasm. So just because you have enthusiasm doesn't mean it's a good thing. If your zeal is leading you to harm other people, it's in opposition to love. And so zeal and jealousy are common subjects in 1 Corinthians, where Paul condemns the church for its jealousy. If I go back to 1 Corinthians chapter 3, the very beginning of the book, before he gets to this chapter on love, there's a lot of preceding information about the problems going on in the church. And he says there in chapter 3, verse 3, "For you are all still fleshly, since there is jealousy and strife among you. Are you not fleshly? And are you not walking like mere men? For when one says, 'I am of Paul,' and another, 'I am of Apollos,' are you not mere men?" It's hard to imagine in English, but jealousy here is the same word, same root as what you see with the word zeal. And here Paul means that they're trying to compete with each other to get ahead, to be recognized over the other members of the church. And maybe like the English word, they're zealous of each other's relationships. But here those relationships are right there within the church. They're jealous about spiritual gifts and power and recognition in the church. And they are used to a world where people feel better when they make other people feel smaller. Anita was talking about how she didn't particularly like recently going over to the middle school and teaching. These kids are really mean to each other. You're in middle school. You go around and you put the other kids down. A lot of insults go trading back and forth. I delivered a few, received a few. Why do you do that when you're in middle school? You put the other kids in, you want to feel better about yourself. You think maybe by putting somebody else down, if somebody else is beneath you, that means you're higher. And we rank ourselves that way. We compare ourselves that way, much like what happens in modern churches, right? Church members sometimes want to be first, everyone wants to be important, recognized for what they do. Rivalries can form, and people can get split up into factions. And maybe we put labels on people. Conservatives versus liberals. Older people versus younger people. The marrieds versus the singles. The rich versus the poor. They aren't necessarily given names at the time, so people kind of divide up on subjects or on issues. They often just start with people maybe taking a stand on something or agreeing with people who see the things the same way. And it's very innocent at first. Good intentions that disintegrate into arguments in fights like the Corinthians had. They don't agree, and they want to make themselves feel better as opposed to someone else. The kind of jealousy that we're talking about here is selfish. It's about fearing that you'll lose someone or something that you want. It's possessive. It's about you. It's not about the person you love. Love can't be jealous because it can't be selfish and contentious. If you're putting somebody else down, you can't be at the same time loving them. You're destroying the relationship. I know a man who wanted a prominent role in the church, but other people were chosen instead. He had a hard time adjusting to not being chosen, so he worked at it for a while. And over the years, he got himself elected into being an elder. And people had some problems with the way he acted and behaved at times. But he kind of pushed himself into that role anyway, without a lot of people supporting him. And of course the church kind of split up. People walked off and left because of what he had done. It's not just enough to want to serve or to lead, to use your spiritual gifts, but you have to work on how you use them. Not everyone can do the same jobs. When we compete with each other, we behave selfishly and we destroy what God would have us to build. Another church I know, there was a preacher's wife and an elder's wife. And it took me, I was there for like a year before I recognized they never talked to each other. And I asked about it. And there was a grudge between the two of them. They wouldn't talk to each other because of some perceived wrong that was done years ago, where one of them felt like the other one was trying to rule over her. They just never let that go. They were great people. If you looked at them individually and had relationships with each of them, as far as we went to their houses, we knew them well. They're good people. But they couldn't get over this one incident. And it kind of tore their relationship apart and it set a bad example for people around them. Each of them was kind of blinded to the harm and the selfishness of their behavior. Love cannot be jealous, Paul says. So we read on, let's flip over to chapter 12 in 1 Corinthians. Verse 29. Paul says, all are not apostles, are they? All are not prophets, are they? All are not teachers, are they? All are not workers of miracles, are they? All do not have gifts of healings, do they? All do not speak with tongues, do they? All do not interpret, do they? But earnestly desire the greater gifts. And I show you still a more excellent way. You look at that passage and say, why are you including that when you're talking about jealousy? I don't see the word jealousy there. Earnestly desire. Guess which Greek word's behind it? Zelos. The same word that we associate with zeal or jealousy. It can be a good or bad thing. Earnestly desire, he says. Have zeal for those gifts that serve other people. And Paul goes on in chapter 14 and he encourages them to desire prophecy and teaching and the kinds of gifts that serve other people. Rather than speaking in tongues, they're all absorbed and focused on this idea of speaking in tongues because you stand up in front of other people, you start babbling these languages that nobody understands. It sounds a lot like the pagan temples around them, and people look at them and think, wow, I can't do that. You look impressive. And Paul says, that's not so impressive. Earnestly desire the greater gifts. You're not here to make yourself look good and to puff yourself up by getting a bunch of attention and focus heading your way. Instead, you're here to serve and love and care for other people, to live like Christ did, to take care of your neighbor. You're not here to ask the question, who's more spiritual? But that's obviously the question they were trying to answer by their behavior. Well, none of us actually raises that question like, who's more spiritual? Let's have a contest. But sometimes people act that way. And that's the concern that Paul has here. And so Paul goes on to say, love does not brag, and it is not arrogant. It's part of the same flow of thought. Jealousy, to brag, it's about that getting self-attention kind of thing. Getting people focused on you. Love can't be focused on itself. Can't be absorbed in getting attention all the time. When you're jealous of your brother's success, you can't love your brother at the same time. When you're bragging, trying to lift yourself up at somebody else's expense or trying to show how wonderful you are to other people, you can't love them at the same time. When you're arrogant in the way that you treat other people around you, you can't love at the same time. There are ways that you try to feel better by lifting yourself up above other people. I watch football a lot. You see these football games, the guys get to the end zone. Boom. The little guy does the dance, I forget what that is. Who's that? Victor Cruz, he's got the little dance going. I can't do it. He's got the moves, grabbing the attention to himself. And we all look at that, right? And inevitably when I hear people, when I watch football games where people do that, the people I'm sitting with are like, why doesn't he just sit down? Why can't he just score and act normal or whatever? And I like to have fun, but sometimes people like opening the Superman on their chest kind of thing, like, look at me and what I'm doing. And they put down the other players, poking fun at each other, poking at somebody else's failure to get them. And I like what one coach said, if you just put the ball down after you score, people will think you've been there all the time. That you're just used to doing it all the time. But instead, you dance around. I'm not sure people really think that, unfortunately, because the kids, they watch and they want to be like the guy who's like Superman. You don't want to be like the guy, the Victor Cruz, who's dancing and having fun. They want to be like somebody who's getting attention for themselves, because they want to have that attention, right? We want to feel good about ourselves. But the warning that Paul makes says, love is not focused on making ourselves look great by putting other people down. It can't be. Love is not a selfish